Thank you, Mayor Bloomberg, for explaining why we need to take environmental and climate risks seriously and why we need a balanced approach to our energy policy, which is what we hope to do here at the center. Our next speaker is Tom Donilon, the National Security Advisor to President Obama. He'll deliver remarks, and then when he's finished, Daniel Yergin will come up on stage and join him, and they'll have a conversation here. Again, if you have questions, write them on cards and pass them to the front, and we'll give those to Dan. It is one of the highlights of my professional life that I get to say that I worked for Tom at the National Security Council. Few people can combine his deep national security expertise with his political skill, and that's a very potent combination in Washington. And with all the national security crises that he juggles, from North Korea to Syria and Egypt and Libya to Sudan to cybersecurity, the list goes on, I know how deeply he's thought about what the changing energy landscape means for America's place in the world. Whenever an article would come out about a new report or study, we'd inevitably forward it up to the suite, as Tom's office is called, and inevitably the reply would come back, he wants the full report and the appendices, and I know how much he values good, rigorous analysis and what they can contribute to the debate. I hope that's what we can do at the center, and I hope he'll find our work valuable too. So I'm very grateful to Tom for traveling to New York today to share with us his thinking about the geostrategic implications of today's energy and climate challenges and opportunities. Please join me in welcoming National Security Advisor Tom Donilon.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everybody. Jason, during your time at the White House, the President and our team count on your deep knowledge of energy, climate, and national security. So thank you for inviting me here today. And thank you to Columbia University. You chose well in Jason, obviously, and there could scarcely be a more timely moment for the inauguration of a center like this. And finally, thanks before we get started here to Dan Yergin, who has made unparalleled contribution to how we understand and talk about energy. Dan, I look forward to our discussion today. I got to tell you, I said to my staff, it would be more appropriate for me to be interviewing you on these issues than you interviewing me, but I look forward to it. And I want to also congratulate you on hiring David Sandalow, who's here, with whom I've worked on in many iterations, an important part of our team at the Department of Energy, and he's a terrific choice for your inaugural fellow. Now, it's a bit unusual for a national security advisor to address an energy conference like this one. So let me begin with a straightforward proposition. Energy matters profoundly to the United States national security and foreign policy. It matters because the availability of reliable, affordable energy is essential to our economic strength at home, which is the foundation for our leadership in the world. It matters because scarce resources have driven both commerce and conflict since time immemorial and still do today. It matters because energy supplies present strategic leverage and disposable income for the countries that have them. It matters because the challenge of accessible, affordable energy is shared by people and businesses in every country in the world, young democracies, emerging powers, and developing economies and allies and adversaries alike. It matters because disruptions in supply anywhere can have economic impacts that are global. Energy shapes national interests and relations between nations. It shapes politics, development, and governance within nations, and it shapes the security and stability of the climate and the environment. For all these reasons and others, increasing global access to secure, affordable, and ever cleaner supplies of energy is a global public good and, from my perspective, most importantly, a national interest of the United States. Finally, at this moment in history, energy matters to those of us who are entrusted with U.S. national security because the United States is reaching an inflection point in the story that Dan Yergin has so expertly told. We are in the midst of two changes that have presented themselves with great speed. First, a substantial increase in the supply of available affordable energy inside the United States, which is having important impacts on U.S. economic growth, energy security, and importantly, geopolitics. And second, a transformation in the global climate, driven by the world's use of energy, that is presenting not just a transcendent challenge for the world, but a present-day national security threat for the United States. Both push us towards the same longer-term endpoint, a comprehensive transformation of the world's energy economy towards cleaner, more sustainable energy solutions. So today, I want to first talk about the changes underway and why they matter for U.S. national security. Then I want to explain how we intend to work domestically and internationally to seize the opportunities this moment presents and meet these challenges head on. First, what we're seeing. Let me begin with a brief description of the changing context. The current optimism about the U.S. and global energy picture is a relatively new development. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, America was largely self-sufficient in oil production. But in 1970, U.S. oil production peaked at over 11 million barrels a day, unable to keep up with U.S. growing demand. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Dan tells the story of the day in 1972 when the Texas Railroad Commission ended its decades-long practice of rationing oil supplies. There was no more surplus oil left to ration. The United States needed to consume it all. This was a negative turning point whose implications for U.S. power in the world became painfully clear during the Arab oil embargo the following year. Suddenly, the United States thought of itself as an energy-poor nation, dependent on oil and subject to events beyond our shores. And this mindset held for over 40 years. When President Obama took office, the energy picture looked decidedly different than it does today. Indeed, forecasters said, and I know there are a lot of forecasters here, I guess it's an admonition to be humble in your forecasting. Forecasters said that the United States would need to double its imports of LNG over the next 5 years. There was renewed talk of peak oil. Nearly every prediction about our energy future made 5 years ago has been turned on its head. U.S. innovation and technology are allowing us to tap unconventional energy resources. Total U.S. oil consumption peaked in 2005 and has been declining since, a trend that the President's energy initiatives, including fuel efficiency standards and investment in new energy sources, will only deepen. To understand how significantly and quickly the landscape has shifted, consider a few statistics. First, domestic oil and natural gas production has increased every year President Obama has been in office. We now produce 7 million barrels of oil per day, the highest level in over 2 decades. Next, the International Energy Agency has projected that the United States could be the largest oil producer by the end of the decade. Of course, we recognize that these are early days, as I said, and prediction is a risky business. In 2005, 60% of U.S. oil was imported. Today, that number is 40% and falling, a dramatic move towards fulfilling the President's goal of cutting our oil imports in half by 2020. Today, the United States is the top natural gas producer in the world. Our natural gas production has grown by 1/3 since 2005, driven by the increase in shale gas, which now accounts for 40% of natural gas output. The domestic price of natural gas has dropped from over $13 per million BTU in 2008 to around $4 today. Natural gas imports are down almost 60% since 2005, and we are exporting more natural gas by pipeline to Mexico and Canada. And the final observation I'll make here is U.S. energy-related greenhouse gas emissions have fallen to 1994 levels, due in large part to our success over the past 4 years in doubling electricity from renewables, switching from coal to natural gas and power generation, and improving energy efficiency. New opportunities are also emerging globally. The Western Hemisphere is poised to be a major energy supplier in the decades ahead. The Americas have been responsible, and I've been struck by this in doing the research for this speech, the Americas have been responsible for over half the growth in incremental oil supply over the last 5 years, and BP predicts the Americas will account for almost 2/3 of the growth in global oil supply between now and 2035. That also means more supplies from relatively more stable nations with greater commitment to the rule of law and open markets. And when the President travels next week, actually, to Mexico and Central America, energy will be among the top issues discussed. The nature of global energy demand is also shifting to reflect the changes in global economic growth. Demand across Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America is surging. And this year may well mark the first time in history that oil demand from developing economies surpasses that of developed nations. Now, we're just beginning, I think, to understand and appreciate the geostrategic impacts of these changes to the United States and the global energy landscape. So let me set out a few that I see. First, the new U.S. energy posture and outlook will directly strengthen the nation's economy. There are not a lot of iron laws in history, as everyone in this room knows, but one I think is, and as the President has said, that no nation has been able to maintain its military or political primacy without maintaining its economic vitality. Our strength at home is critical to our strength around the world, and our energy boom has proven to be an important driver for our economic recovery, boosting jobs, economic activity, and government revenues. IHS estimates that the shale gas has supported developments that supported direct and indirect employment for 600,000 Americans in 2010, a number that could double by 2020. America's natural gas boom is helping to spark a domestic manufacturing revival. Manufacturers in energy-intensive sectors have announced up to $95 billion in investments across the U.S. to take advantage of low-cost natural gas. The largest investments announced have been the chemical sector, which uses natural gas as feedstock, as you know. But there have also been major announcements in other industries like steel, plastic, and glass. Furthermore, as a result of the administration's investments in clean energy, tens of thousands of Americans have jobs, and America is now home to some of the largest wind and solar farms in the world. Domestic economic developments like these improve U.S. standing and send a powerful message that the United States has the resources as well as the resolve to remain the world's preeminent power for years to come. Second, America's new energy posture allows us to engage in the world from a position of strength. Increasing U.S. energy supplies act as a cushion that helps reduce our vulnerability to global supply disruptions and price shocks. It also affords us a stronger hand in pursuing and implementing our international security goals. Let me give you an example of this, which I've been intensively involved in the last 4 years. The United States is engaged in a dual-track strategy that marshals pressure on Iran in pursuit of constructive engagement to address the world's concerns about the Iranian nuclear program. As part of the pressure track, the United States is engaged in really a tireless diplomacy, a tremendous effort to persuade consuming nations to end or significantly reduce their consumption of Iranian oil, while emphasizing to suppliers the importance of keeping world oil markets stable and well supplied. The substantial increase in oil production in the United States and elsewhere meant that international sanctions, that the U.S. and allied efforts could remove over 1 billion barrels per day of Iranian oil while minimizing the burdens on the rest of the world. And the same dynamic was at work in sanctions we put in Libya in 2011 and Syria today. Third, the development of a more global natural gas market benefits the United States and our allies. We have a strong interest in a world natural gas market that is well supplied, diverse, and efficiently priced. Increased United States and global natural gas production can enhance diversity of supply. It can help de-link gas prices from expensive oil index contracts. It can weaken control by traditional dominant natural gas suppliers and encourage fuel switching from oil and coal to natural gas. A decade ago, market analysts forecast that the United States would need to import large volumes of natural gas by pipeline and LNG. Since then, domestic production has reached historic highs and domestic natural gas reserves have almost doubled. Gas supplies originally destined for the United States can be redirected to other countries. Many of our allies have expressed interest in the potential of the United States as a global natural gas supplier. The Department of Energy, as many here know, is currently reviewing at least 17 applications to export U.S. LNG to non-free trade agreement countries. It's conducting a comprehensive review of all the relevant factors to determine whether each non-FTA LNG export project is deemed to be consistent with the public interest. Global demand for natural gas is projected to rise by 1/5 over the coming decade. Burning natural gas, of course, is about 1/2 as carbon intensive as coal, which makes it a critical bridge fuel, a really important concept as the world transitions to even cleaner sources of energy. Fourth, reduced energy imports do not mean that the United States can or should disengage from the world, or in particular the Middle East. And I want to stress this today. Global energy markets are part of a deeply interdependent world economy. The United States continues to have an enduring interest in stable supplies of energy and the free flow of commerce everywhere. In the Middle East, we have a set of enduring national security interests, including our unshakable commitment to Israel's security, our global nonproliferation objectives, including our commitment to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, our ongoing national interest in fighting terrorism that threaten our personnel, our interest in our homeland, our strong national interest in the pursuit of Middle East peace, our historic stabilizing role in protecting regional allies and partners and deterring aggression, and our interest in the enduring and ensuring the domestic transitions in Yemen, North Africa, and ultimately Syria succeed. Which brings me to my fifth point. Although it is typically discussed in terms of its energy, environmental, or economic implications, the changes to our climate that we are seeing are also a national security challenge, and I want to stress this today. The national security impacts of climate change stem from increasingly severe environmental impacts that it is having on countries and people around the world. Last year, in the lower 48 U.S. states, the lower U.S. 48 states endured the warmest year on record. At one point, 2/3 of the contiguous United States was in a state of drought, and almost 10 million acres of the West were charged from wildfires. And while no single weather event can be directly attributed to climate change, we know that climate change is fueling more frequent extreme weather events. Last year alone, we endured 11 weather-related disasters that inflicted $1 billion or more in damages, including Hurricane Sandy, which many people in this audience know all too well. Internationally, we've seen the same. The first 12 years of this century were all among the 14 warmest years on record. Last year, Brazil experienced its worst drought in 5 decades. Floods in Pakistan affected over 5 million people and damaged or destroyed over 460,000 homes. And severe flooding across Western Africa and the Sahel impacted 3 million people across 15 countries, just to give a few examples. The fact that the environmental impacts of climate change present a national security challenge has been clear to this administration from the outset. The President's national security strategy recognizes clearly that the danger, I quote, that the danger from climate change is real, urgent, and severe. The change wrought by a warming planet will lead to new conflicts over refugees and resources, new suffering from drought and famine, catastrophic natural disasters, and the degradation of land across the globe. The Department of Defense's 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review, issued by Secretary Gates, warned not only that climate change, and I quote, may act as an accelerant of instability or conflict, placing a burden to respond on civilian institutions and militaries around the world, end quote, but also the potential impacts of climate on our operating environment and on our military installations at home and around the world. A National Intelligence Assessment 2008, multiple worldwide threat assessments produced by the Director of National Intelligence, and numerous expert analyses have reached similar conclusions. This underscores the need, for the sake of our national security, to reduce greenhouse emissions that drive climate change and to assure we are prepared as possible for the impacts of climate change. Now, those are 5 observations I wanted to make with respect to what we're seeing. Let me talk now about U.S. policy and what we're doing about this at this point to address these issues. First and foremost, the United States is leading at home where our energy and climate policy begins. The United States is pursuing an all-of-the-above approach to develop new sources of energy, expand oil and production, boost renewable power generation, support growth in nuclear power, and increase efficiency, while also working to reduce reliance on imported oil. I do not believe that the dramatic and fast-paced energy changes we have seen in the United States in recent years is likely to have begun elsewhere first. And this is an important point as too. Why in the United States? Why have these developments been most powerful here? Many other countries have promising shale deposits. I think that the reason that the development has succeeded in the United States is because we have the right balance of an open investment climate, innovative entrepreneurial spirit, environmental safeguards, infrastructure, and skilled service companies. The U.S. shale experience, I think, demonstrates the powerful results that a complex resource base, combined with open markets, wise early government investment in key technologies, a vibrant private sector, access to capital, and a predictable investment climate and a responsible regulatory structure can deliver. And I think that's an important list to keep in mind, and it is important to reflect on the strengths we have here and to ask ourselves why here. And I think those are the key elements. Under President Obama, the United States has also made unprecedented investments in clean energy research and development and renewable fuels. The President has put in place historic new fuel standards, as everybody here knows, for cars and light-duty trucks that will nearly double the efficiency of our fleet, double the amount of power produced by wind, solar, and geothermal, and boost the efficiency of buildings in our industrial sector. He's called for the creation of an energy security trust that will support new research and development of cost-effective advanced transportation technologies, and he's leading domestic and international efforts to support the safe use of nuclear power. I think it's important, by the way, to reflect on this, to note that the United States has achieved significant reductions in our greenhouse emissions. Last year, energy-related U.S. emissions fell to the lowest level since 1994, remarkable 12% below where we stood in 2005. And even as our economy recovers, we are determined to keep moving towards our target for 2020, bringing greenhouse emissions approximately 17% below 2005 levels. So, first is what we're doing at home. Second, We're working to manage potential causes of energy-related conflict, and this is obviously most directly what I work on most days. Let me give you 3 or 4 examples of this. For one example, the promise of offshore energy resources is contributing to tensions in the South and East China Seas, and it will test each Asia's political and security architecture. While the United States has no territorial claims there and does not take a position on the specific claims of others, the United States firmly opposes coercion or the use of force to advance these claims. We have consistently made clear our position that only peaceful, collaborative, and diplomatic efforts consistent with international law efforts can bring about lasting solutions that will serve the interests of all the claimants in the region. The Arctic is another place where the potential for new supplies of energy and new shipping routes can lead to rising tensions. So far, that's not been the case, and the United States looks forward to meeting with our partners in the 8-country Arctic Council next month, which we value as a forum for open and collaborative dialogue among the littoral states on a range of Arctic issues. Now, to put ourselves in the strongest possible footing to address these and other issues, and to prevent energy-related conflict, the United States really should take the long overdue step of ratifying the Law of the Sea Treaty. Every business person I speak with, every military leader, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and many, many others all come to the same conclusion. Ratifying the treaty will only strengthen America's hand economically, diplomatically, and in terms of our security. Let me go on to another example in terms of the energy diplomacy. Iraq. And I see Megan is here today, who knows a tremendous amount about this, made tremendous efforts and contributions here. After the U.S. has invested significant blood and treasure, we have a strong interest in seeing a peaceful and prosperous country emerge. Key to that will be the successful development of Iraq's energy resources. Now, this is a good example of where energy diplomacy matters. Iraq's energy sector has the potential to deepen internal and regional divisions, but it also can help unify the country. And so we're working to help Iraq expand its oil production, build out its export infrastructure, and diversify its energy transportation routes. Over the past 2 years, Iraq's crude oil production has grown 25% to 3 million barrels a day, surpassing Iranian output and reaching levels not seen in over 2 decades. We envision in Iraq fulfilling its tremendous oil supply potential with multiple existing and potential export routes from Basra to Ceyhan. Getting there will require active diplomatic engagement and an agreement among the Iraqis to share export revenues equitably as set forth in their constitution so that all Iraqi citizens benefit from the natural resources. It is a long-term vision, but one that is essential for Iraqi stability, our own national security, and the future stability of global energy markets. And the United States will support this vision as a central priority in our partnership with Iraq. Third, we're building on the unique diplomatic, regulatory, and technical capacity of the United States to help other nations increase energy supply, build capacity, and strengthen institutions that enable international cooperation. We're working to help develop supplies across the Western Hemisphere where the use of conventional and new technologies in the United States, Canada, Brazil, and Colombia is making an essential contribution to growing energy supplies. Through bilateral and multilateral initiatives, technical and regulatory exchanges, and trade and investment, the United States is helping countries accelerate this trend responsibly. Last year, for example, the United States signed an important trans-boundary hydrocarbons agreement with Mexico to develop our shared oil and gas resource in the Gulf of Mexico in an environmentally safe and responsible way. We're actively engaged with countries such as Poland, Ukraine, Jordan, China, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico to exchange lessons on developing unconventional energy resources, and we're sharing best practices because countries and companies have seen from U.S. experience that creating the right policy and investment environment is critical to successful development. Now, the United States does not view our energy security in zero-sum terms, and we're working with our partners around the world to ensure that they don't either. For example, China will become increasingly reliant on imported oil and natural gas through this decade and beyond. That means secure, affordable, and cleaner supplies of energy is a goal we share with Beijing, and one which we are working on to fulfill through regulatory, technical, and industry exchanges led by various departments in our government. As emerging economies consume an ever greater share of global energy, the International Energy Agency and other institutions will have to modernize to reflect evolving market realities. As major consumers, China, India, Brazil have a common interest in a healthy and more transparent market that functions efficiently and effectively. And it's critical that these countries are brought closer to the IEA and participate in coordinated responses to energy supply disruptions and reporting in energy markets. But we should think about the modernization of the IEA more broadly. When the IEA was established in the 1970s, oil was not a globally traded commodity. There was no financial market in oil. Gasoline prices were heavily regulated, and disruptions in supplies tended to show up as physical disruptions with long lines at gas stations. The global energy market has changed this dramatically. Oil is now traded globally. There is a financial market that dwarfs the size of the physical market. Gasoline prices are deregulated, and disruptions in supply are more likely to show as price spikes than physical shortages. And the policies and practice of an IEA for the 21st century should reflect these changes as well. Fourth, and finally, we're working with other nations to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, prepare for the climate impacts that it is too late to avoid, and bring about a global conversion to cleaner sources of energy. When it comes to climate change, action at home is necessary but insufficient. We have to galvanize action from others, and here too there is progress to report. In Copenhagen in 2009, President Obama and other world leaders negotiated a climate agreement that for the first time included international emission reduction commitments from each of the world's largest greenhouse emitters. Under the agreement reached at Durban in 2011, we're working to negotiate a robust new international climate agreement by the end of 2015 that would take effect in 2020 and commit all of the major carbon polluting countries to take ambitious action. Alongside the global talks, the administration has looked for creative ways to convene key stakeholders to take concrete actions together. Through the Major Economies Forum, we launched the new Clean Energy Ministerial, where a group of nations representing more than 3/4 of the global greenhouse emissions collaborate on deploying clean energy technologies and energy efficiency. Now, even as we work through all available channels to mitigate climate change, we're also working to prepare for climate impacts that it's too late to avoid. The United States is building greater climate resilience at home and helping developing nations withstand the impacts as well. The U.S. intelligence community continues to study where and how climate fuel security challenges may emerge. The Department of Defense is funding research projects and factoring climate change into analysis and planning, recognizing the challenge it presents for mission-critical infrastructure and military installations and capabilities and readiness. So let me finish up. Energy and climate are critical elements of U.S. national security. These issues have risen to the top of U.S. diplomatic agendas around the world, with Europeans considering their energy future, China and other emerging powers addressing their growing energy needs, and with major energy consumers and producers old and new. How the United States manages these changes to our energy economy and our climate will be an important measure of U.S. leadership for years to come. Now, there's a vigorous debate underway among international relations experts and commentators about so-called declinism, the notion that American power is on the wane. It's a proposition that I reject in the strongest terms, and indeed, I asked Henry Kissinger about this, one of my predecessors about this, and his response was pretty simple. He said, well, Tom, reflect on the following question. Is there any other country where you'd rather be national security advisor? And he had a point. So it is a proposition I think I reject personally, I think, and is analytically incorrect. And in his most recent book, another one of my predecessors, Zbig Brzezinski, obviously well known to this audience and this institution, in his latest book called Strategic Vision, he has what he calls America's balance sheet, where he tallies American strategic assets and American strategic liabilities. Now, many of these assets are well known. Economic and military strength, an unrivaled network of alliances spanning 2 oceans, favorable demographics, a blessed geography, and unparalleled innovators and educators. All this ensures that the United States remains a global leader in the 21st century. Now, when President Obama came into office, America's energy future would have typically been listed among the liabilities in the balance sheet. And let's be clear, an essential transition to cleaner sources of fuel still lies ahead. But after years of talking about it, we are now poised to control our energy future. And under President Obama's leadership, we're moving the U.S. energy position from a liability that we manage into an asset that secures U.S. strength at home and leadership in the world. And that really is a profound change. Thank you very much for your patience. I look forward to your questions.
Tom, thank you very much. On behalf of everybody, I want to express great appreciation to you for being here. I think your presence demonstrates not only the launch of this, or the relaunch of the center, but really the importance of these issues and these changes to the U.S. foreign policy. And I think, as you said, the changes have happened quickly. And I think what you provided today is both a statement and a framework to put it into the context of what it means for the position of the United States. You talked about both energy diplomacy, but I was very struck that, as you said, so many of your day-to-day things you deal with involve energy, although it's not necessarily the central issue, and that was very striking. It seemed to me that you answered a question that's in a lot of people's minds, which is as this development has happened in terms of, as you said, we control our energy future in a way that we didn't, which I thought was a very strong way to put it. There are two views. One, that it means U.S. withdrawal from the world, and the other, it means a strengthening of the position of the U.S. in the world. And I think you made it very clear that it's a strengthening that's there. So maybe as a first question to just start things off, you mentioned that, you said that we now have the resources as well as the resolve to maintain our preeminence. And obviously this question of U.S. decline or not decline is something very much on your mind. As you look at the balance sheet, what are the other kind of the really key things in your mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do want to stress the point, Dan, that you made, which is that I think the developments in our energy future both strengthen us, but they do not in any way imply a retreat of the United States from the world. U.S. leadership is essential because we have many interests that we're pursuing. But I also do want to underscore the fact that energy issues do arise almost daily in the work that I do with countries around the world and in thinking through policies, and it is striking. On the declinism issue, as I was talking about, I think that if you look back at American history since World War II, there have been numerous times when this debate has arisen, when we've questioned ourselves as to whether we were on the downslide, right? Whether or not we were falling behind, whether other countries were getting ahead of us. And it has been almost a periodic debate. I think that's a strength of the United States. It's interesting. It's almost a U.S. compulsion to ask this question. You know, how are we doing? Are we falling behind? What do we need to be doing better? And I think it really is unique in the American character, and it really does, I think, push us to address challenges that we have. And it has over our history done exactly that. If you reflect on the enduring strengths that the United States have, I think it really does point to a very strong future. And you do the list. The largest and richest economy. You know, I did want to write down one statistic here. You know, we're at about $47,000 per capita right now. China's at about $7,500 per capita. We have a strong and deep economy, deep markets in the United States. It's the premier destination for investment in the world, and will continue to be. Look at our treasury rates here. And the United States, by the way, has reinforced that, I think, through policy choices. And again, if you look at where the United States is coming out of the financial crisis today, where others in the world are, U.S. policy choices at the end of the Bush administration and the Obama administration were critical if you look at the differential in growth rates right now in recovery between us and Europe, for example. So we have a very strong economy. Second, we are the world leader in innovation. Third, our military strength is unparalleled. And will continue to be. No other nation in the world can project force around the world with the efficiency and power the United States can. Next, we have something that usually isn't on the list, I don't think, but I reflect on a lot. No other country in the world has the global alliance and partner system that we have. If you look at our peer competitors, you can't find one that has a global alliance system like the United States has. And by the way, this has been put in place and nurtured in a bipartisan basis since World War II. We have NATO, obviously, which most people think about as our key alliance system, and it is in Europe. But we also have very strong alliance systems in Asia, which have been a very important priority and focus of the United States during the Obama administration. We have a favorable demographic future when you look and compare us to our principal competitors. By the way, and importantly, I think in the current policy context, that is buttressed by our openness to legal immigration in the United States. As I said, I think we have a favorable energy future. We have the best university systems in the world. And we have, I could go on with a long list here, but I think it is also important, it's a fundamental to focus on our geographic situation. We are blessed with a fertile, large landmass with 2 oceans and 2 friendly neighbors, north and south. So we have, I think, a set of enduring strengths which I think really do form a successful rebuttal to this decline theory. And also, last thing I'll put on the list is our values and our leadership. The world looks to the U.S. for leadership on issues day in and day out, and I experience that. I experience it every day. But there are challenges, and they are significant challenges. But I think they have this characteristic. I laid out what I think are enduring strengths, and we do have challenges going forward, economic and social challenges going forward. But they are all challenges that can be dealt with. None of them are inherent. None of them are insoluble. And I think the principal U.S. challenge that we face right now, frankly, is political will.
Right. And do we have it?
Well, we have historically. Right. I think if you were going to continue the list of U.S. strengths, you'd have to say that the United States has been able, over the course of its history, to have a political system that is adaptable and takes on these challenges and deals with them. And I must tell you, if you reflect just on the last few years, the United States faced ultimately was a national security issue as well. The financial crisis in 2009 was, it's cliche-ish now, it's a cliche now, but it's true, was the deepest and most severe economic crisis the country has faced since the 1930s. And it did come together and make a number of policy choices that have succeeded in putting a recovery in place in terms of investments. And other countries and regions in the world made different choices, and they're not as good a shape. And if you look at their banks and their recovery to pre-crisis levels of growth.
A couple of years ago during the crisis, when China responded very quickly, it was kind of fashionable to say, in other countries, we're looking more favorably on the Chinese model of capitalism. You encounter this on a regular basis. Do you still find that, or do you?
Well, that's more of an international relations professor's question, I think. But this is where
there's some here.
Yeah. This is what I would say about that. Is that I do think that what we talked about in the talk, which is that it is not possible for the United States to maintain its diplomatic primacy and its military primacy without maintaining its economic vitality. That it is absolutely critical as a first-order challenge and task on the national security front is to have a solid recovery from the economic crisis and to restore solid economic growth in the United States. That's absolutely essential for the United States going forward. The world will look at that, and I think they are looking at that. And what they see, Dan, in that is tremendous resilience and the ability to come back from the depths. And I think those who count the United States out now have to reconsider that question. And I wanted to make the point in the talk about why the energy revolutions which are happening, the energy dynamics which are happening, why they happen here, right? Yeah. And I do think it is the right combination of government investment in early stages of technology, but a very strong private entrepreneurial system with appropriate regulation. And it is, I think, an example to the world.
Right. You're just back from another country that has a very large energy economy, Russia. I think you're just back just last week. How is the administration thinking about relations, these complex relations with Russia in the second term, and how does energy fit or not fit into that agenda?
Yeah, I think it fits. On Russia, as you said, I visited Russia a week ago Monday and met with the senior Russian leadership, including President Putin.
He dropped in.
He came to a meeting. I'd seen him. I hadn't seen him. I'd seen him last about a year ago, where I saw him the Friday night before he was inaugurated in Moscow, and we were able, I think, to work through our agenda and schedule of engagement for the rest of this year, which I think was important to do. We have had some issues, obviously, some complications in the relationship, and it was our judgment it was important, because of the relationship, which I'll talk about in a second, to engage and to put in place a agreed-upon framework and pattern of encounters. And right now, the President will have at least two summit meetings with President Putin between now and the end of the year. He'll meet with him at the G8 meeting in Northern Ireland in June, and then a full bilateral summit in September in connection with the G20 meeting, which is in St. Petersburg. We'll probably meet with President Putin in Moscow. Pragmatic cooperation with the Russians is in our mutual interest. Our judgment is that productive and constructive great power relations will enable us to achieve a lot of what we need to achieve in terms of our goals, but also in terms of achieving global solutions to broader problems. And when they aren't constructive and productive, I think, as we've seen, for example, in Syria, we're not able as effectively to address these issues. So we do very much want to have a mutually beneficial relationship with Russia across a range of issues. Now, it's also important, I think, to reflect on the fact that we have a lot of achievements with respect to that module and method of engagement. We have, over the last 4 years, put in place the New START Treaty, which has reduced the number of deployed strategic weapons to the lowest level since the 1950s. We have worked with the Russians to get their successful accession to the WTO, and we have repealed our Jackson-Vanik laws, allowing us to take advantage of that, our business to take advantage of that. We've done a 1-2-3 agreement on nuclear cooperation with the Russians. We have worked very closely with the Russians on the P5+1 mechanism with respect to the Iranian nuclear program. We have worked very closely with the Russians in the six-party talks with respect to the Korean problem. They have been, and I'll say this directly, they have been essential partners in our effort in Afghanistan, Dan. The Russians have, through their work with us on what's called the Northern Distribution Network, which is our supply network from the north into Afghanistan, have been absolutely critical partners for the United States in terms of our ability to move our forces in and out and to supply those men and women who were there in the fight in Afghanistan. There's a long list, I think, of achievements. That's not to say there aren't challenges. And looking ahead at these summits, which is one of the main reason I was there, we have a long list of things to do. Trade and investment, energy. As two of the world's largest oil and gas producers in the world, we have issues to address, including supply. We have a joint interest, I think, for example, in Asia in maximizing production and supply. We have a very important strategic stability and arms control agenda that we're going to continue to work on and pursue, and I had good discussions with them about that. We have our ongoing work in North Korea and Iran, as I said, and we have obviously it's still a very difficult problem in Syria to work through together.
Right. You very recently gave a speech on our relations with Asia and the rebalancing towards Asia. In your remarks, you talked about the South China Sea, East China Sea, those issues. How do you see energy fitting into this rebalancing with Asia?
Yeah. A couple of points. First of all, as I said, it is a potential source of conflict. And so the United States' involvement, I think, as a sponsor of peaceful solutions to these problems and working through appropriate mechanisms and not through coercion is an important role for the United States to play. It's part of a broader role, though, the United States has played in Asia for the last 60 years. The United States has formed the platform, if you will, security platform on which Asian social and economic development has taken place. And our rebalancing strategy is a reassertion of that role. And it's absolutely critical. When we came into office, we asked ourselves a question that I think every administration does and every company does, for example, any new CEO would do. Where are we underinvested and where are we overinvested? And we believed we were underinvested in Asia and set about correcting that. And that really has meant deepening our relations, starting with our alliances, a lot more mind share, a lot more diplomacy, building out of an architecture, a security architecture there, and also building out the economic architecture where energy will be an important part. The most important trade negotiation in the world right now is the Trans-Pacific Partnership in Asia. And we're on track, I think, to finish that negotiation by the end of this year. Japan has just agreed to join those negotiations, which would mean that this is a $1.5 trillion in terms of trade, and about 40% of world GDP are involved in this trade negotiation, which is it goes to the other point that we're talking about here, the absolute essential nature of U.S. leadership to bring these things together.
Right. In that speech you gave on Asia, you talked about the cyber issue.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very striking how this has sort of, in the last year, has just seemed to come to the top of it. Obviously, it involves China. How should we think about it? Well,
I'm going to take that in two pieces, generally, and then I'll talk about China specifically. Generally, cyber has become an aspect of many of the national security issues that I and our team work on every day. And there are a number of aspects to this, right? There are threats to critical infrastructure. As more of our critical infrastructure becomes connected through the internet, it becomes more vulnerable. And so protecting that becomes a priority. There is straight-up espionage, right, which is classical spying on our defense industry and trying to get secrets and develop countermeasures and things like that. There are efforts via cyber to shut down cyber and control it through national efforts. And there is cyber-enabled economic espionage and theft. And that was the issue I addressed in the speech, and that's the issue that we're addressing with the Chinese. And this is, again, this is not general cyber crime or hacking. This is a direct theft of United States private and government assets for use for advantage. And that is the discussion that we're having with the Chinese. Now, what I said in the speech and what we've been doing is a couple of things. One, we asked the Chinese to recognize the scope of this issue because there's a very, and our business community tells us this, a very large number of attacks and these kinds of activities coming out of China. Second, to begin and investigate and deal with this. And third, enter into a dialogue with us about what the rules of the road should be here. And we're moving on all of those. They've agreed to open up a dialogue within our strategic dialogue with them. Our chairman of our Joint Chiefs, Marty Dempsey, was there in the last few days to talk about this as well. But the most important thing, I think, about doing this, engaging in this with China is this. It had to become one of the central points of our economic dialogue. And that is why I think you've seen a lot more. It's become a bigger problem, right. But the only way to deal with this was to bring it to the center of the relationship and to present the proposition that any economic discussion with the United States, given the threat to the United States and given what the degree of theft that's going on, was going to involve cyber.
In your remarks, you talked about sanctions on Iran and made the point that without this development of tight oil in the United States, these sanctions would have been much more difficult to implement. Can you give us a sense overall of where you see negotiations headed and how the administration sees managing the risk of Iran with nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
Particularly after we see what North Korea can do by flexing nuclear weapons. Yeah,
well, that's a very important point. On the point on sanctions and the importance of increased production by the United States, and by the way, and others in the world, as you know, there were steps taken by other suppliers in the world which also were important with respect to this. You can imagine, again, I'd ask you all to imagine yourself sitting in the Situation Room. We have designed a very intensive pressure track to force a choice on the Iranians with respect to coming to the table on their nuclear program. And the discussion goes this way. Okay, you all have designed a set of sanctions which are likely to be effective. And indeed, I think they've been more effective than people predicted, right? I think that they've gone from almost a million barrels a day reduction. But what is the price response going to be? And what's the impact going to be on a recovering U.S. economy? And is this something we really should do on balance? And we were able to make that decision because of increased production in the world and our confidence that, in fact, that the Iranian oil taken off the market could be replaced and there wasn't likely to be a huge price impact and a detriment to the United States or the world economy. So it really was pretty essential. With respect to Iran generally, I'd say this. And you bring up North Korea. The United States policy is to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and we will do what it takes to do that. And I think the example you gave, I think, underscores the importance of achieving that, point one. Point two is that we've offered the Iranians a set of choices. And indeed, from the outset of the administration, we offered the Iranians the opportunity to deal directly with us to address their problem, and that door is still open. But we also said to the Iranians, by the way, and to our partners who are working on this, the Chinese and the Russians and others, that if in fact the Iranians would not respond, they would not engage with the United States in a bona fide dialogue, that we would engage in an international pressure effort. And that's what we've done. And we put in effect, I think, the most effective sanctions put in place on any country. And the Iranian government and Iran as a country is paying a very high price for not coming to grips with its nuclear obligations. And indeed, you know the statistics. I think that the rial has probably lost half its value. There's probably 40% inflation in Iran right now and a mass reduction in their oil exports, which directly leads to a large reduction in their government revenues. So there's a lot of pressure on the Iranians right now. We still have left open the door for negotiations. If they don't engage in a bona fide negotiation, the pressure will increase. And as President Obama has said many times, all options are on the table with respect to our dealing with this problem ultimately.
Right, thank you. So last question, it comes, several people have sent up here. You described how our thinking, our international posture, our political discourse has changed because of the changing U.S. Energy position. In your day-to-day interactions with so many governments around the world, can you give us a sense of what you're hearing from other governments, the degree they see it, and how it's changing their perceptions?
Well, it's interesting. I think the first point would be that they see its contribution to the U.S. recovery. Right. And indeed, Dan, we were speaking about the Chinese. You think about the stake that China has in a solid U.S. recovery and a strong U.S. economy. And it's a strong joint interest between us and China. So I think, first of all, that countries see this as a contribution to U.S. recovery. Second, as I mentioned in the talk, you do see countries looking to the United States to contribute to the putting together of a global gas market. And obviously very interested in the United States as an alternative supplier, but they're also benefiting today by the increased production because, as I said in the talk, that gas that we produce, right, in the United States makes it for a much healthier and less expensive global market. So we do have a tremendous amount of interest in that issue. We see, third, a great deal of interest in our sharing expertise, technology, and regulatory insights that could contribute to the development of these resources in those countries.
Right. Tom, we want to thank you on behalf of everybody for coming here today. I thought when you made that comment in your speech of Henry Kissinger's reply to you about being which country would you like to be national security assistant of, I thought that was a very Kissingerian reply to you, but I think certainly all of us here and throughout the country, great respect and appreciation for your service as National Security Advisor. And certainly we very much appreciate the focus you've brought and the framework to thinking about what energy means for U.S. foreign relations going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Great to be here.